today. I'm going to have Brad kick it off with just a couple notes and words before we get into the first exercise. But if anybody wants like writing utensils or anything, there will be kind of some like head down time where you can think for yourself and write some notes, and then we'll do share out. And then later for the second hour, we'll do some small group work as well.
There's just a couple housekeeping. So
please, thank you.
You just go out this little hallway, take a right down the long hallway, quick right, quick left. And then back in the dark. This is for all the women, sorry. And it's on the left. Man, you're straight ahead. We don't want you to get lost.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, if anyone needs anything. Women just go down a long dark wonderful. I'll kick it off to Brad.
And another quick housekeeping, we're going to keep this very efficient because Abby and I have to leave for the airport right at noon. So we have 2 hours. We're going to get through this.
You bet.
We're going to be very efficient.
Yes.
So I just want to review quickly the 17-year history of SAME. We just passed 17 years at SAME Cafe Denver. And the reason I want to bring this up is because I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that while we have a 17-year history, we are really only about a year and a half old with the organization that we currently have, less than a year and a half old, because we opened doors, but we restructured the whole organization about a year and a half ago to have 2 sites and to have a national board and a national presence as well as the 2 local. And so I just want to bring up the fact that Rory has been in her role for 5 months now and has already created an incredible culture there. And then Carrie has my old job and she's only been in it for a year. And so the fact that we have bumps right now is completely understandable. And also let's put it in the context of we're all in new roles right now. And that's why there's a lot of kind of challenges, I think, that we're facing, and they're normal where we are. But yeah, we have 17 years of history and now 1 year of history in Toledo. And built on the strength of Toledo, we now are talking to 7 libraries around the country who are interested in this model, as well as a couple other community cafes that are having challenges and they're interested in talking about rebranding as a SAME cafe and using our model specifically. So there's a lot of cool growth on the horizon potentially. I want to frame the whole time that we're together through the mission of creating a community. Our mission is creating community. It is not food. Food is the mechanism that we do that. And the primary way that we create community is through food around the tables, right? Right now, this conference table, but we also have it around the prep table in the kitchen, around the dining table in the dining room. And so the whole thing, everything that we're doing is creating community. And community has this touchy-feely vibe, but it actually is really hard. It means that you have to be willing to show up with your voice, and it means that you have to be willing to hear other people's voices. Both of those don't come naturally. We want to stay in our lane and drive forward with that, but being able to create community is compromise. And compromise means everybody is a little bit frustrated. And so it's a messy, gritty process to create community, and yet it is beautiful on the other end. And the value of it is incredible for what we do. And it's not just touchy-feely. And then finally, I want to recenter us around our values. So our 5 values are phenomenal food, whole people. We believe in whole people, they're not just bodies, they're not just minds, they're whole people. Belonging, participation, and service. And those are all of our primary core values that drive every single thing that we do. We don't have time to do the full round robin of this, but I'd like for us to take 30 seconds to think about what is your SAME cafe moment? What is the moment that makes you want to give your time, energy, and experience and resources to creating community through healthy food access? So I just want to take a quick 30-second break, and I want you all to think about what it is. When was the moment when you knew that this was something you wanted to give your time and energy to? And now I'd like to hear from 2 people, 3 people maybe, about what was the moment when you knew. Yes.
For me is when I went out to Denver with Steve and we were in a cafe and you came out and talked to us as a group and went through the values and we saw people in the cafe. It was pretty emotional moment for me. I knew I wanted to be a part of it.
For me, it was a little afternoon on August 22nd, 2018.
What time was it, Steve?
A little afternoon. And I saw the participation board and I knew what it meant. I knew what it meant, and I saw the community table. And the first words out of my mouth were, "This is us. This belongs in Toledo."
We'll hear from two more actually when it's good.
I had my first moment with a quiet gentleman that came through the line often. And I was like the first person who totally just got a job, and like we hadn't had a strong relationship, but like he trusted me, and I just had to go back in the closet and just like have a moment. And that was the realization, like incredibly powerful and beautiful work, and it is chaotic, but it's worth it.
One more.
I'll say, this wasn't a moment that threw me in at the beginning, but, last week, this week, actually, on Monday, we knew we were getting, 26 degrees that night. So I called the firm and I said, hey, can I come? Can I just do a last minute, get as much as possible? And it was a warm welcome, and it was for squash, and they said, I don't know when to put it in, so I'm gonna need a little direction. And they were waiting for me. I got there, there's enormous bin out in the field on a pallet that they were gonna forklift back to the barn when I got done, and they said, where's your crew? And I said, I'm just here by myself. And it was cold, like the wind was kicking up, it was like 35, and you could feel the temperature dropping, and I was, when I got there thinking, do I really wanna do this? And then I just kind of meditatively walked the field and filled this thing full of squash, and the sun was spectacular. It got lower and lower. I saw the sunset over the fields full of pumpkins and gourds and all sorts of stuff, and I thought to myself, I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky to be the one, because while I was doing it, I was thinking, this is going to be a warm meal for somebody. Somebody this winter is going to come in and they're going to get this great soup. And it all starts here. Gift of the earth, gift of these growers, gift of volunteers, like we give love through the mechanism of food, and food is fundamental. So when I get to do that, it is privilege.
I love that. Thank you. Courtney, I saw your hand up, so I wanted to hear yours.
Mine was, and excuse my language, a guest said, she knows, that I put my whole ass into a soup.
Figuratively.
But as funny as it was, I'm not used to people appreciating my food as much as everybody does at the cafe, so I feel like I'm just getting better and better.
You are. You are.
Yeah.
I often get told I don't do anything half-assed, like I live a whole ass life.
Yeah.
I wanted to center us around those values in those stories, because that's why we do this hard work. And what we're going to do is to now review all of the things. Our end game with this is that we would know what are the things that we did very right and want to do every time we replicate. What are the things that we did well but could be improved on significantly? And then what are the things that we completely screwed up on that we will never do again, and that they were big mistakes? And that's kind of, we have this beautiful process that Jill created for us to do that. And so, but I want us to center it through those values and through those stories of why we do this hard work. Yes. All right, back to you, Jill.
Cool. Yeah, well, if you don't get choked up in the first 30 minutes of a same cafe meeting, are you even at a same cafe meeting? Nope. Is the recording serving as our note taking?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Just wanted to double check. Thank you for saying that. I think that this is, as I was going through this, and thank you so much, Aaron, contributed to this mentally for me. Brad and I had several conversations about this. But this is what keeps us all coming back. This is the core of who we are. This is why we do what we do day in and day out. So I appreciate you saying that this is really what we're trying to center on today. So I already kind of overviewed the objectives, rules of the road. I just want to lay this all out. I like to do this in every meeting. We're allowing everyone to be heard. We're respecting other people's experiences and perspectives. Avoid criticizing input and ideas from others. We're avoiding blaming people for past events. We're identifying root causes, not just symptoms. Focusing on understanding, learning, and looking ahead. Focusing on the facts, we were talking about processes and outcomes, and then focusing on the future as we reflect about the past. Wonderful. Okay, so the way that I've structured this is that we now get to, as humans do, retrospectively put things in nice, clean little boxes. So, you know, Brad, and I know Aaron, you have worked on some of these components too, but we're really looking at this in phases. And Toledo had kind of funky little phases that hopefully are not going to be, they're not going to look the same for future replications. So there's 3 phases: our pre-approval stage, our building stage, and then grand opening and beyond. So how I'm going to posture this is that we're going to walk through what the primary work looks like in each of these phases. And then we'll talk about what was actually happening in Toledo. So also, I put this together, so please, I want people to contribute as you're reflecting on these things. If you have other memories or things that we missed or gaps, that's an important component of this process. And then we'll all have an opportunity to look at what process improvements were yielded from going through that. What were our learnings in Toledo that we already know? And then we'll talk about what we missed. So I'll have a series of questions. So we're going to do that 3 times. Talk about what happened, the process improvements, and then we'll have some time to reflect and give feedback. Okay. Okay, phase 1, put on your time capsule thinking caps to August 2019. COVID wasn't a word in our vocabularies and everyone was living their lives. 2018, yes. So the pre-approval stage. So a community is interested in opening a same cafe in Toledo. Obviously, a group of folks went to Denver to observe the model in action, express their interest in replication. A local steering committee was developed. Brad visited Toledo several times with board members, presented a full proposal to the Denver board, and then Toledo was ultimately greenlit to move forward with the development of a Toledo cafe. Now, for us, this was a pretty long process, right? This was happening over a pretty significant period of time. So thinking about that, the process improvements that we developed in that time. Moving forward, interested communities will be directed to complete the Same Cafe 101 course if they're expressing interest. Same Cafe staff will complete a site visit for any interested community, and then they'll begin a road mapping process. So they'll create a funding plan with either full funding or joint funding for a prospective site. A maximum investment in a future site would only have the maximum of half would come from the Same Cafe Growth Fund. A location must be identified before a cafe spot is greenlit. So that was obviously, in memory, one of our big challenges, right? We were trying to find a spot, trying to find something suitable. But because we had that runway, what was birthed out of that was this amazing library partnership. So emphasizing that in the future for the creation of new Same Cafes. And then a local advisory committee will be stood up. They'll be helping to develop this roadmap and really lay out what that opening plan looks like. And then jointly, the same staff and local team would apply to the board of directors to become a future Same Cafe. And then they would vote to approve that before moving forward. So those are the processes that are already in place. And this is a very fantastic little graphic here that Sophie on the national board created. That's really, really helpful to kind of just visualize what that trajectory would look like for a new communities cafe. Okay, so everyone is going to get just a minute to kind of put their head down and reflect on the phase 1 that I just laid out and those process improvements. So I want you to think about the considerations that are missing in the process refinements. Any solutions from that slide that you feel are incomplete or flawed, voices that are missing from those developed processes, and then clarification on anything that's confusing. And I want to just give a little asterisk that we're going through this really high level today. for a lot of these process improvements, there's significant backup documentation that folks can look at and take a deeper dive on. So we might, if questions come up, we may have some of the answers for those, but still, working out what might be missing is very critical. So we'll give everybody kind of a quiet minute, and then we'll all be able to share out together. Okay, and folks can still keep taking notes, and discussion will probably spur other people. Does anyone want to start with any of their initial reflections on phase one? Kick off the discussion. Please, Abby, yes.
I think I would reflect on a couple of different pieces. I think the funding plan, you kind of want to figure out what is indicative of a sustainable financial structure.
Absolutely.
Also half the funds I still, question of like one viability, but also how much money do you need in the bank for that to even be a possibility?
Yep.
And then what role could debt play, or low cost financial vehicles play in the building?
Absolutely.
So I think finance can get more creative and slightly different, and it should be based on stipulations of what's available, what's accessible. I think beyond identify, what can we line up or approve beforehand in terms of location? The advisory committee, just making sure they feel like they have the governance or the training to support an understanding of like what that encompasses or entails. And then just trying to think of like what are other long-term indicators of sustainability. So like when I work in a foundation, we're 2 years old, but we fund 100 organizations, including this one. And we can splice the data enough that we've begun to say, oh, seasoned founder, previous experience in this, or and what might that criteria look like to just give us, just to indicate potential upside.
Right. So some type of like metrics to assess viability on the financial side and structurally.
You got it.
Okay. Yep.
Simply said.
Oh.
Piggybacking onto that, I think I understand the model is that even if we were to provide it to have, they would have a mechanism of refunding.
So I'll outline that just to clarify. Basically, any future cafe, the idea is that we would work with the local team in whatever city that is to build out what it would cost to open, so the opening costs, as well as the operation for the first year that it's open. So if we open, in Toledo's case, we opened in November, so we only had 2 months of operating. But essentially, what is the opening cost for the first year? And then we would say, apply to being a same cafe, fill in the blank town. And the only way they're going to get approved is if So All May Eat has in its growth fund, not in its reserves, but in its growth fund, enough to match half of that. So that would essentially, if you see what we did here in Toledo, we drained the reserves from Denver to open it, and then now we're refilling that. And I think it was a worthwhile investment, but it definitely is something we're never going to do again. So essentially, moving forward, we will have like 3 to 6 months of operating expenses that is our reserve that will never get touched, and then we'll also have money that is raised specifically as growth money, and that will be the matching. So we wouldn't approve a new site unless we had half of that. So for instance, let's say Same Cafe Austin, Texas creates a budget of $500,000 for opening in the first few months of operating. we would approve, the national board wouldn't approve until we had $250,000 that we would dedicate to that site until they either opened or proved that they couldn't open. And then it would go back into the reserve if it wasn't. And then for future, basically, as they get up and going, there's always about a 2 to 3 year dip in a startup where it costs more to run than we're able to raise in the local community. And so that's kind of the idea, is that we're investing money in that dip so that once they get up and going, then they can also start to pay into the pay it forward fund. It's kind of like debt, but I'd rather us not think about that. It's going to be more like a pay it forward fund. So we can have cafes that once they're up and going that are putting money into the pay it forward fund for future cafes. And it will be the amount that they withdrew from the pay it forward fund that they would pay back over the course of 5 years. So, yeah.
Would you take into account like the cost of living in each city? Cause like it would be more expensive to open a same cafe in Austin than it probably was here.
Yep.
Okay.
All of our salaries are based on the 50th percentile for any, we don't have negotiable salaries, by the way. All of them are set, and they're set based on the 50th percentile of nonprofit salaries in the community that we're in. And we have a very robust process. I'm happy to outline that for anyone who's interested in not doing it here, but
Yeah.
it's a robust process, and we set the salaries every year for coordinators, managers, directors, officers. Those are the 4 levels that we do. And it's all based on the region here. But anyway, so that's the clarification. It's a little bit like taking out a loan and paying it back, but it's not a formal loan. It's only going to come from money that is specifically set aside for growth.
Yeah.
Not our reserve.
And this, the national board had issues. So I think that digging into this and really like fleshing this out more.
We will flesh it
Yeah.
out before we ever roll it out,
Absolutely,
but
absolutely.
that's the out.
Other thoughts or reflections on phase 1?
I think one thing I think about is, I think we, on the one hand, the time that it took, the time that this phase took in Toledo was long, and part of that was probably COVID. And I also wonder if that time was actually beneficial in terms of like creating community and creating commitment that will sustain it. And I think like that'll be something that maybe needs to be borne out, but thinking about like I guess the piece that I'm still like missing from this is how do you create that buzz and that community investment without having the product available, and which you all did amazingly well and sustained it for several years, right? And do we have like how do we recreate that?
Yes.
Or how do we support other communities in building that?
That was the same thing that I was thinking about, so.
Yeah. Well, I just want to address that really
Yeah.
quickly is if you go back to the timeline that's in there, it's 2 pages back or 1 page back.
Yeah.
That timeline, what happened was we looked at this in Toledo, where were the big pauses where things sort of like started to lose steam. And there were 2 of them. One was, the pause between him getting interested and then 2 years later, the timeline was actually
No. there was no
2018.
pause like that.
It was 2018, and then we approved it in 2020. So it was actually a 2-year delay before we were able to say yes to Toledo.
Yeah.
And then the other big pause happened when we were looking for a location. And so we had all this energy and stuff, and then we paused for 18 months while we solidified a location. And that's, thankfully we got into the library because that was always my dream to be in the library. And then that sort of proved that model. So we're mitigating that first by not approving until we have money in the bank to move forward with it. The second thing is that we're gonna have a location identified before we approve it. And then the third big pause happened or big challenge happened with staffing, which we'll get to. But one of the things that we're shifting is being able to have money to hire an executive directors upon approval. So upon approval, we'll involve an executive director who will then guide the effort until it opens. But
We weren't
Yeah,
far
go
off
ahead.
of that last thing. We were pretty close to that.
no, we would do it on
Whether-
approval.
Well, but we were pretty close to that, is what I'm saying, relatively close to that, in my opinion. Anyway, so the whole thing about the buzz, the local buzz and communication. That was, first of all, it's hard to do that with something that doesn't yet exist. In an organization that there's only one of. Like this was all
A lot of faith.
extremely organic and figuring it out as we went and, taking a group back on, what was my second trip was a big part of that, and then these two in particular, early on. That started the buzz. I think one of in the pre-approval and the build stage, I think, when it comes to that sort of thing, the communication, the networking, the talking to people, I think we did a really good job of that, and it may be the most important reason that you ended up doing this in Toledo.
Yeah.
Right? That's here, because it would have been done somewhere once all the wheels started turning and the Denver board was thinking about it, now the national board, and all of that. But it was the communication here. I think one of the best things, and I think it needs to be added to this phased timeline here about creating those things. I know that that's all about expenses, but there are other kinds of expenses besides financial. When we did that Zoom meeting in January on my mother's birthday in January of 2021, and we had 150 people on a Zoom meeting during COVID. And those were the number of people who signed on. We don't know how many multiples were on those screens, and we had a Q&A, a 30-minute presentation, and that we stuck to. It was very sharp, very well done. And that showed in the fact that the Q&A afterwards on Zoom, for of all things, lasted an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And then we shut it down because there were people still on. That sort of thing, building that into this.
It's just in a different document. So this is
Yeah.
just
Okay.
financial we have all of that.
Okay. All right.
And
good.
that's all stuff that you'll
Yeah.
get by the end of the year. So Aaron and I have been working on these documents, all the background documents for this. I want us, because we want to move on to the next. But I
Yeah,
wanna
anybody
look at
online.
anything missing, solutions that are incomplete or flawed, voices that were missing, and any clarification that's still confusing. I just wanted to go back to the question.
Yeah. And any folks online, if you.
Oh, Christina, you had your hand up. Did you want to? No. Okay.
The only other thing I was thinking is how do we get the voices of the folks who are no longer part of the process, right? I feel like that would be a really important piece here. Like we don't have like formal exit interviews from folks who have been involved, who were involved and no longer are. But I think that would be, if we could get those perspectives, that would be really helpful.
One of the things that we're doing is we're going to make a streamlined version of this process and then try to do it with like Jason Koopsma from the library and Chris Cook, the national board chair from that was she followed. And so like to get some of those voices that were heavily involved but are not anymore, and then maybe even reach out to Corey and Veronica and see if they're willing to do it.
Yeah, just briefly, I think one of the key moments we had was having PK on.
I also wrote down here, how do we get PKs?
Yeah, I mean, PKs.
He wants to do this process, so I'm going to do a Zoom version of this in the next couple of weeks too.
Okay, no, I think that was critical.
Yep.
Okay, I know you have your model, but he was important.
Oh my gosh.
That's why he's on the national board.
Yeah.
Somebody's crush on PK.
Yeah.
Just a minor thing too, I was thinking to continue to like in that year, 2 year process of like building momentum. I wonder if it would be interesting to have them do like two-day pop-ups somehow to like showcase and illustrate to the community. I say 2 day because if one of our options is donating produce, there's no point, it's 1 day.
Yeah.
But smaller things like that to like give the community an actual taste of what is to come.
Which we did a little with our, exactly, we called it Taste of the Same Cafe, I think that first.
Yeah.
It's great, and so we did that with our annual gala to try to feature that, but I think there are ways that we could do that through pop-ups.
We also did that with the initial advisory board.
Yeah.
Made the food of the same cafe.
Yeah.
Is it,
Anything that I shared the other night was already captured.
Yes.
So.
is the location, is it a must that it's a library? I mean,
It-
we're looking
it's
for
a must
locations
that-
where we can create a no overhead kind of situation.
The dream is a no overhead or low overhead, and so there has to be some kind of an agreement with the locations for future sites. Yeah.
All right, we're heading into
On to
phase
phase
2,
two.
everybody. Okay, November 2020, we're all going into the first COVID Thanksgiving and what is happening? Phase 2. So this is the building stage. An executive director is hired. An opening plan is developed with the national and local advisory board, the executive director, and you're setting a grand opening date. Staffing structure is determined and local candidate searches begin. Staff is hired and the grand opening occurs. And then we're hosting a gala to introduce Same Cafe to the community. So what that looked like in Toledo. Our executive director was hired simultaneously with the rest of the staff in Toledo. Our gala was hosted prior to the grand opening, right? We had this in June and then we opened in November. Staff churn. We all know that this is our our theme in Toledo, right? Staff churn occurred early when we had a chef depart before opening. We lost another chef a few months later. And then finally, understanding by the board of directors and the local advisory board that staffing support and structure was never reflected of Denver. And then we took that corrective action. So a little ways in, we realized, wow, we're missing some really critical staffers that we had kind of, we hadn't recognized that Denver was leaning on some AmeriCorps member support and some other cafe coordinator support that we never were really able to achieve. And Monday will be the first day that Same Cafe Toledo has been fully staffed and it's full iteration. So yeah, just took a year to work out the kinks. But no, I think that's a really, really important thing. And I know we have all had very exhaustive conversations about it. We've all experienced it. We've all felt it. But that's a massive component. So process improvements. So Brad had mentioned this, but staffing. So the idea moving forward will be that an executive director will be hired upon cafe approval. So later, then the staff will get hired closer to imminent opening. So the idea is that this individual will have an opportunity to really develop some of those fundraising mechanisms, start to kind of lead the charge on executing what that road mapping process looks like, develop relationships, manage the advisory board, etc. Go ahead.
Can I throw in a few comments as we go through these?
Sure.
The one thing is, if you notice the timeline, we were approved in 2020 November, and we didn't hire an executive director until May of 2022. The big thing that we're going to shift is to hire an executive director upon approval. And now, of course, 18 months of that was delaying looking for a location, and we weren't willing to hire an executive director until we got a location.
Right.
And so when we got the location, we waited to get that solidified and signed, and then we hired an executive director who then immediately had to hire a team, and it didn't work. I think the challenge is that we had an executive director who was not fully onboarded, who was trying to onboard and create culture with the team that hadn't done it. So that's one of the big things. We'll have money on the front end, and then that person will be a part of the process for potentially a year before hiring a team that will then come on closer to imminent opening. So
Well,
that's one of the big
location being secured as a requirement of approval.
Yeah.
Right.
It's going to eliminate that long
Yeah.
delay.
There goes that, closes that whole.
Absolutely. And with regard to onboarding, I know that we've heard that from some of the staff churn conversations, that folks didn't feel adequately onboarded or something was missing in that. So the Same Cafe 101 and making sure that also that the executive director really has a deep understanding of every role in the cafe is very critical moving forward. Looking at candidate search. So this is something that we've talked about, looking for leaders with team management skills, knowing how critical that is to be able to run the team to have a fully functional cafe as a higher emphasis than that fundraising experience, right? So we can coach that, we can teach that, we can help, other board members can help to support those efforts, but really looking at those team management skills. And then again,
Shout out to Lord.
As I said, obviously having some money dedicated early on, like they are going to really have that established donor contact at the outset to steward those relationships, and from a volunteer side as well. Fundraising, we talked about that. And then Erin has also created a gala guidance document that has clear financial processes, shifts for volunteers, detailed planning. So the gala is really shored up as well, from what we learned from our Same Table event last year. Okay.
I can't wait to release all the documents from Erin.
Yes, release the documents. Okay, so same questions. Considerations missing, solutions that are incomplete or flawed, voices that are missing, and then clarification on things that are confusing. So just a quick minute here, and then we can start the discussion. Who would like to begin? in Phase 2.
Just a clarification, is it,
Please.
the timing of the gala, does it matter if is it specified whether it's before or after opening?
I don't know. That might be a Brad question. We, I think we were so anxious at that point
Yeah.
to have something tangible like folks are talking about,
Yeah.
that June for us was really helpful. And then moving in, we hosted ours in April of this year, which we're also doing some reconsideration because of produce availability to kind of showcase. So I think that needle has moved for us a little
Yeah.
bit, and that would be helpful to better understand by community what works
Yeah,
best.
I was gonna say, I don't think it should be set, so.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it should be community specific.
Right, and
You
let
believe
folks
it
kind of
should be
guide.
what?
It should not be set in stone,
Okay.
like whatever
Yeah.
works with community makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got the template and then host it when it makes sense for you. Yeah. Super, go right ahead.
So this is just from a chef's point of view. I think a chef should be hired earlier on in the process, like probably after an ED gets hired
Mhm.
and they have their onboarding and they fully understand, just for the fact of chefs thrive with organization. So if they can set up their own like systems and processes before the cafe's open
Mhm.
and build relationships, including
Mhm.
with the farmers and everything before, then I think you won't have as much chef turnover.
Yeah.
And that way I think it would just. Cause I think, in my own opinion,
Mhm.
probably not having systems in place, which is something that like Kim and we could get together and not necessarily make like rules, but more like guidelines that chefs can then turn into their own, because it's not. Kim has processes that just won't work in Toledo, and I have processes that won't work in Denver.
Right.
That way each chef in each city could mold those guidelines into what they need. But I feel like a chef needs to be hired basically shortly after an ED. That
Mhm.
way they can visit Toledo, visit Denver, learn the guidelines, and then go back and create their own.
Awesome.
So
Thank you for that. Carrie said something to
Courtney?
that effect
Yeah,
in our
Carrie said
national board
something
meeting.
similar, and so we're gonna do a little like conversation with her and Kim, and I'd love you in that as well.
Okay.
To say, how do we perfect the hiring of a chef?
Please.
And also just solidifying positions, I think, we originally had a volunteer manager, not a cafe manager.
Mhm.
I don't even know how long, I think it was a month or two,
Mhm.
that was part of it. So especially if we're moving into theory, more of a library model, the positions will be more set.
Right.
So just making sure we have clarity regarding those position roles.
Yeah.
Which
Thank
I think we've gotten now.
Yeah,
And then Christine online said, having a location ED out the gate will help address many of the challenges that Toledo faced in the first year. And that's a really good point, Courtney.
Yeah.
Just recording it for posterity.
Other thoughts?
I do think it's important to like, in conjunction with having a chef come on board early, is making sure that there is a same cafe person who is experienced being that person's mentor, because I think that's what threw our first experience into a sort of a tizzy, is that we were asking someone to create processes for something they'd never seen or experienced or understood even.
Mhm.
And so that was sort of like, oh, yes, I want all of these toys and I want all of these things, when they didn't really understand exactly how a same cafe functioned.
Right.
And so having a mentor in that position, like Kim working directly with someone who's done the role before, who can say, no, you don't need a $3,000 juicer.
And along those lines, we now have a huge book of standard operating procedures that is in process, but we will have those that will include the process for all of the food that is made there. And like, that's now happening, that we are not just one site. And now we're in the process of releasing that too.
And just to tack on to what Libby was saying, and not just before in the planning stations, but even having somebody as current same cafe employee on hand when it's opening and being on in the space with the new team for a period of time to help get everything straightened out. So
Right.
people understand firsthand how it's same cafe runs.
Right.
I just want to piggyback on to what Courtney said, which is, we did have a little bit of a runway as far as, having a chef and having some, you know, like, we know we're gonna open, but back in like May of 2022, I started going out to all the farms. I started telling the story. I started saying, you know, when can we come? What will it look like when we do? We started volunteering for them, just doing work that didn't yield any food. We want this relationship. So it was all about relationship building. So then when we mobilized in October and said, we're actually opening, it was just huge welcome. It was like, we've been waiting for you, you know, and then since then, the welcome is still there. We just haven't had the crew. We haven't had anybody who has the knowledge and the relationships except me, and so it's too much institutional knowledge for one person to have. If I leave, and it has gone out the window with Lynn, and then Veronica, and then the whole period where we had nobody, and then May, and then you guys for the summer, and then, like, every single time we started all over.
Right.
We don't know any of this. We don't know any of the farm. We don't have any phone number. We don't know anything. We don't know how to get food. And it was like, okay, let's start all over.
Yeah, from a succession planning part, I mean, I think that
Yeah.
that's really important to
So-
keep in, keep in mind.
And one of the processes, again, that we're rolling out as Salesforce is gonna be holding all of our relationships.
Mhm.
And we're gonna make sure every relationship has 2 people assigned to it. So essentially, every farm will then have a relationship that is in there with contact information, who we know there,
Yeah.
and any contacts we've had with them,
Right.
and any donors. So that way, when Courtney comes in,
Mhm.
she can look and say, oh, this farm, here's the history, and now I can start a conversation with them and know who to call and how to get in touch.
They're the most wonderful people, and I feel sorry that nobody else knows them. Like, I just really would love to be sharing this experience, but also, you know, just the how do you make the contact? How do you show up and make this happen, or get the food there? And it's a process. They're not delivering.
Right.
You know what I mean? We're going and getting it. Oh.
Yeah, so I have 2 thoughts here. One, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No.
But I get excited about it. So, the first thought was something I had earlier was, and I know we're working on this, but, you know, everybody learns in a different fashion, you know, like, you could give me a manual and I will fall asleep. Give me a video, I'm like, oh, okay. See it in person, I'm like, whoa, I'm all over it, right? So, you know, just addressing all these different learning modes, I think we're getting there. I think that's cool. But wouldn't it be cool if we could do a video, and maybe it's already planned, on the whole farm growing relationship, you know, like talking about the relationship and how do you, like, for the benefit of others who are starting,
Right.
how do they go out and,
Yeah.
so there may be people like that aren't like Toledo, where we have a lot of foodies who have a lot of relationships already established in some of those places.
Yeah. Well, it is all about, as Courtney said, it's all about relationship maintenance. So in January, I started asking who will plant specifically for us. And then they buy the seed and they lay out their literal plan of their fields. And we have a whole field like at Haynes that's just for saying. They planted that for us. If we're not gonna go get it, it's embarrassing. It's like, you planted all of this for us. We have to have a mechanism to get
So
it.
in the,
you know,
in the near future, I would like for you, me, and Eric to sit down and talk through all of your relationships that can be transferred into Salesforce. And we can actually like articulate all those relationships that you have. So
Yeah.
that's one. And then the second thing is historically, we have never gone to get produce ever.
Right.
We've never had the ability to, and we don't have the staff to. And so we need to figure out what that looks like in a new place like Toledo, where we're up and going fiercely from the beginning. But we've never built it in to have staff that can go pick it up. And because originally it was Brad and Libby, and it was just those 2 running the cafe. So they were like, we'd love to have your produce, but
Right.
figure out a way to get it here.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that we need to adjust expectations on, to say, if we're gonna have a mechanism where it's getting picked up, that needs to be a board-driven effort to be able to find volunteers and get it there. But it's a really overwhelming cost for us to
Right.
put a vehicle in and a
No,
dedicated staff person.
It can't be.
Right.
It can't be.
So it's just something new that we've never done before, and I think you would be really important in us, like, seeing what that looks like for future ones
Yeah.
to say.
There's just, it is a role where it's tons of communication. I'm on the phone or emailing a lot. I call before I go. I find them when I get there. We do our work. We say goodbye, thank them afterwards. You know, can we come again? And we come on Saturday. Oops, it's gonna rain. Okay, whoops, we're gonna change this all up. You know, it's a constant figuring that out. And then
And that's where I think
Yeah,
we
we
need to
do.
have a process for the board to pilot that, or for us to be clear with the farms, we can't pick it up.
Yeah.
We'd love to have it, but we can't do that. We don't have the capacity. And so if you want to grow for us, great. How is it going to get here? And then they can figure it out to get it donated, or the board can figure out a process for doing it. But I will say, I don't think we're ever going to be able to have the staff and vehicle capacity for us to go to all these farms and pick it up. So I think we need to talk about how we do that better for future ones.
Right.
I think also if we ask the farms to bring it, it'll, cool.
Yeah.
This harvest season, I have no room
Yeah.
in my freezers. I have no room in my fridges. It was the start of that in September. I think if we can get the farms to deliver to us, it would space it out.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
could use product that we need to use first.
No, and that's okay. If they,
Yeah.
Harvest it, we have to go out.
we can't do that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. For future, we need to be clear with farms. We cannot go harvest it.
Or clear with like advisory. board.
Same can't go harvest it. If an advisory board team wants to make that happen, we can. But
Right,
it is
same
no,
staff.
it's never gonna be a
Yeah.
staff thing where we can go out and harvest.
Not staff, no.
Right.
But I don't think we're gonna get the donations just showing up.
We did in
And
Denver.
it's like, you do, we did in Denver, we had no problem. We have more food than we know what to do with.
And they had to drive into the city.
You
It is right
you gotta get it into the city.
So,
Yeah.
It's
the
messaging.
challenge is we started this way.
Yep.
Mhm.
And to transition might
It's
be
challenging,
really
yeah.
difficult, if not impossible. So
Yep.
I think those are the kinds of things that every community has to explore for
Yep.
themselves, and.
And I just want to be cognizant of time. So,
Let's put a pin in that. and
yes,
come back to
it definitely needs to be,
Judy, I like this.
yes, we need to have that conversation. Any other final reflections on candidate search processes, fundraising, or any other staffing components? Please, Abby.
I just had like some questions on like, how did fundraising work locally? Because as we're trying to explore if this is, you know, how we make cafes standalone,
Yeah,
obviously with support on like, we do have a grant writer, we do have a finance and accounting person. There are some costs that luckily can be shared
Yeah.
across things, but yeah, how did that feel locally? Do people feel like there's the capacity, there's
I think from my seat, and please other folks weigh in, but I felt like it felt disjointed a lot of the time. So there wasn't clarity on what is the responsibility of national, what is the responsibility of local, like all grants go through national, but we're applying for local grants where folks have relationships. So it felt, and I know this from some of the exit interviews as well, but, and just conversations with some of the board members, there was kind of this like, I think it resulted in kind of a paralysis of like, who owns what? And ultimately, I mean, we had a board meeting where we were like, we kind of don't know who our donors are, or like, we need to step up and be stewarding these people, right? They're local community members. And, some of that was due to staff churn too, but I think not having that clearly outlined of what resides with whom, resulted in no one owning it.
Are we gonna, as board members, have access to Salesforce?
Mhm.
Even just, okay. That'll be a huge game changer. We'll be able to see, like, oh, my buddy who I told about saying, does he ever follow through, or, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and in that turnover, like Rory obviously was stabilizing staff and like focusing on the cafe. And so that transfer of what do we have in like the little green light system? I mean, there was just so much turnover that, you can pump bad data into a system and you get bad data out. So I think that we recognize that we didn't have this comprehensive of our donor record as we
I'm
maybe
sorry,
thought, or they were in different places.
I have to
Thank you
cut
so
out.
much, Steve. Yeah,
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Good to see you.
Get ready to build community around tables tonight. and give people a voice.
We love it.
Where have I heard that before?
Yeah.
The materials, it's saying you need to have a Steve North edit wherever you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Wonderful. Any other thoughts on phase 2? Please.
So the food budget, is there a way that, I don't know if it would be in phase 2 or phase 3, but is there any way that like the chef could lay out? Because I know the goal is to get everything donated, but we have to buy some stuff. Like set out, and not necessarily have like food costs, because that would stress anybody out, but almost like food costs, where they can just have like guidelines to stay under, like okay, if we're getting this amount of produce donated, like, let's say 250 pounds of produce donated per month, we're only gonna allot ourselves $1,500 to go and buy whatever we need to buy per month. Is there a way that that could be?
We have
div-
that.
We do?
Let's talk.
Okay,
The fact that that hasn't been communicated to you is the challenge here, not that we don't have it.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry you haven't gotten that, but Rory and you and me can
Yeah,
talk about it.
'cause
You have
I-
a set budget for how much you can spend every week.
okay, cause I do well when I look at numbers
Yep.
and I
Mhm.
have a very analytical way of, I can blame Gus Mancy for that. A very analytical way of like looking at stuff.
We'll get it to you and then you can follow that. Carrie kept her, when she was the chef, she kept her own spreadsheet separately of her expenses to make
Okay.
sure that she was staying within the guidelines. of it.
Okay,
So,
that would be really helpful for
absolutely,
me.
we'll get it to you.
Wonderful. All right, phase 3, last but not least, this is when we open, grand
Oh.
opening.
One quick thing that
Yeah.
Christina said, Carrie had an idea to do a happy hour concept with our farmer partners. Thought it was a great idea, inviting them to the cafe so they can see their impact and we can grow our relationship with them.
Mhm.
Do an end of harvest happy hour at the cafe. I
Yeah,
think that's a great idea.
Oh,
off
yeah.
season.
Off
There-
season.
there
Yeah.
it is.
And it's also worth noting that anyone who's ever worked the harvest season at same cafe has trauma with it.
Yeah.
Every single one of us. I haven't worked a harvest season in a cafe in 6 years and I still have nightmares about it. Your first harvest season is horrifying and lovely all at the same time because, and it's the interesting challenge, right, Berkeys? And it's the interesting challenge of like being grateful that this is coming in while also being overwhelmed. And every single one of us that has worked in the cafes has cried because we get a beautiful donation. And we're like, I don't fucking want this donation.
Yeah.
That's what all of us think. And then you have to put a smile on and say, thank you so much for coming in. It is overwhelming. And so there's no way to prep for it except to go through it. And then next year you're gonna be the seasoned veteran, Courtney, that's like, you just don't
Oh.
even know. Wait till
I'm already creating systems for
Yep.
next year.
Yeah.
exactly. So I just want to be clear that this is universal for everyone who's worked a harvest season at any same cafe ever.
Okay.
Awesome.
For
Thank you
me,
so much.
6 years ago, still have nightmares.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dream of tomatoes. Okay, phase 3. So the primary work in phase 3, staff is onboarded and trained. Advisory board restructures to ensure staff leads are assigned to appropriate board and local committees. So this is that transition from that wider advisory committee when we had several members to a local advisory board. Defining those subcommittees. I know this was kind of up and down for us, right? We've had lots of different kind of structure models. And then ongoing communications and relationship with the board of directors and understanding kind of what's happening at a national level and how that looks on a local level. So locally, we had continuous staff churn, we had non-contiguous staff leaders for subcommittees, challenges with communications between local and national were my primary observations in that. Process improvements. We've already talked about our staffing structure. We've talked about same cafe 101 training, cross training with same cafe staff. So, we sent a lot of people to Denver who ended up not sticking around with the organization. So really critically looking at that and maybe less travel on the front end, but more after the cafe is established. I think there's certainly something to be said about that cross training component too. So it's a good something to put a pin in. And then the advisory board structure. So the function of board of advisors shifts to that support staff and local lead, and then local members joining the national level subcommittees to shore up those communication pipelines. For me, this is the space, like we're in this right now, and I think this is the space where we still have the most learnings and challenges to overcome. So I would love to, if folks maybe have some immediate reactions or thoughts about that, that would be great. I did want to show this next doc. Aaron and Brad have both been working on and outlining a document that's a little more structured around what the pre-approval, post-approval, and imminent opening phases look like with regard to the different committees and how we've utilized folks locally at a volunteer level. I don't know if you have anything else to add. Okay, wonderful.
I will say we had a little bit of feedback on the national board last night where they said they think it would be important for us to have national representation at every from post approval on. So that we had just put it in there like ongoing, but actually to have national representation. Excuse me. And then I think we probably also should put in here an ad hoc partnership committee during the opening phase of like building those partnerships, the farms and gardens. I mean, I think we could kind of join forces with volunteer farms and food farms and gardens to build the relationships before this, to be the contact to get out into the staff. But this was our first pass at being able to make this functional. And so I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on this. We also have a 10-page document outlining these processes that will be released in the next month or two, probably.
I guess I would make development probably national, but with local, I mean, each, I guess, local committee or, local advisory board should have someone on that. So I'd remove that from ad hoc.
Yeah, the ad hoc development, what that looks like locally was to shift it to a national development model and then having a local team put together in the run up to the same table event planning committee, basically. But I mean, as this has kind of exhibited itself here, and I think it's because there's these other processes coming down the pike, like instituting Salesforce, the executive director really owning that local fundraising. I don't know that I think there's still utility on our end here locally to look at that a little bit. I think it's a consideration for how we move forward and what it looks like. But shoring up that national to local pipeline is critical in my eyes.
Because there seems to be something missing with the local board.
Yes.
In their sense of accountability for fundraising at all.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about people.
Yeah. No, I concur.
The other thing that we're gonna move, and we're gonna have a pause first before we get too deep into this, but the other thing that we're looking at is, I apologize. Moving to an idea, but instead of saying same national, it'll be a shared services model where we will say, like, each of the cafes will be built into their, it'll clarify where the money is coming from, first of all. So basically, Toledo and Denver next year will have a line that says paying for shared services with because that's something all of them is working. And with help from local, but we don't need anybody writing grants at the level. And that's me. Only the national one, because officially our so all we eat. And so we national have to be behind all of it. So that's one. Having like accounting and auditing and 990 services, like that's a shared service that all of us get to. And so essentially building into the local budgets, helping pay for that shared service that is everyone's responsibility, rather than us saying like, here's the national budget and here's the local budgets that don't include any of the shared services. We're going to decentralize those shared services into the local budget, so you're aware of what the value is that's being gotten there and how much that shared service costs for each location, as well as what the benefit of it is. And then that way, if a local cafe decides to roll off and become a separate 501c3, which is kind of the model if they want to, they're aware that like accounting has to now happen locally, grant writing has to happen locally. All of the staffing and payroll, all that would then have to become processes that happen locally, or you can stay a part of the shared services model. So anyway, we'll have a lot better clarity. This was the first year running with this national and things.
I almost like even flipping it for instead of national committees, like, cross same committees or.
We're gonna
or shared
switch.
committees.
Yep. We're switching our language from saying national. It's no longer gonna be same national. We're gonna call it root services probably, or shared services. But root, going with that whole image of trees and we're the root system, that it would be like, this is what Toledo is responsible for helping raise money to pay for the root services that are here.
What, sorry, just the staffing structure, the training, like what specifically do you envision for that? Just being someone that has been recently onboarded through, like, interesting times.
Yeah. Can we do the pause and then we'll get to that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think ideally it would be someone from So All May Eat that is there helping train, that we'll bring in So for instance, you could potentially train someone that's in your position in a future same cafe. And so we build that into, once we have more than one cafe, throw it out there and say, who's willing and able, it'll be part of our budget, but who's willing and able to come to for a few weeks to the new cafe and train that person. Especially ED, especially chef, and especially cafe manager, but then also having a coordinator that is willing to kind of fly out and help train them as well. So,
Do you have like reflections on that?
I have one more question too,
Yeah.
just like the amount of responsibility that this role entails. Like what other specific trainings do you, like de-escalation and trauma training is absolutely crucial.
Mhm.
And I feel like that should be well before we're in the space.
For sure.
So that was one thing that I recognized and made, Lori did a good job of finding what we needed.
Yeah.
Because it's, it can be instantly draining on the human psyche
Yeah.
without the proper way to.
Yeah.
I do have an answer to that. So we are working on, it's happening. We're going to do a cadence of the 4 or 5 major trainings that have to happen, and they'll be happening annually. So this is Eric's work next year, is to set up an annual cadence of those 5 trainings. So trauma-informed care, de-escalation, mental health first aid, all of the ones that we really want each staff person to get. So those will be, you'll know when that's going to happen. And then also trying to source those. We want to schedule them, but also source them locally like we did.
Yeah.
So we are kind of creating the 5 major ones that have to happen, and then whatever has to happen prior to starting, that we would also build that in. So you go through Same Cafe 101, but then you also go through maybe an online training for de-escalation. So you have at least a workable knowledge of it until we get the more robust training in the works. And then Christina said, is there any value in having a 2-tier advisory board for startup, like a project-based board, then have some roll off? It might lend to more clear roles on the board being support for the staff as opposed to roles for the startup. I like that one of the things that we had talked about is that moving us more towards a project-based board structure where we say, here's the project. So PK is a good example. PK is a terrible board member, meaning that he's not great at showing up at board meetings. That's not his skill set. What his skill set is that is wonderful is to be able to get a project up and going and dedicate large amounts of time to that. And then he kind of steps back into the shadows until we have another project for him to do. And so I mean to say he's a terrible board member. He's a wonderful board member. But you get what I'm saying? Like, he loves being able to throw his time and talent behind a project. And I think that we would love to have a process for that for anyone who's really interested in getting a new cafe started, but not interested in being on the board in the ongoing way. For someone who wants to build relationships with farms and gardens, but then not necessarily like steward those relationships. Or, kind of having an option for board members that don't want to be in the ongoing, but instead can take a deep dive into a project and then say, thank you, I'm done. And that's kind of this idea of the same table local committee, is that we could potentially for 6 months out of the year formulate a same table Toledo committee that you could even have a chair from the local community come in that's not even on the board, but could chair the same table event that year. And then really get an honorary chair, exactly. And then it also allows people that are more interested in the project of getting that up and going.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm talking
Thank
a
you.
lot.
No, it's okay. All good. Okay, so that was all of the phases. I do want to take a quick break, but we have 5 questions to get through. I just want to give everyone an opportunity. If there was anything that you felt like you wanted to say that you didn't get to say, a reflection on the past year, something that's been troubling you from the inside out, or that you just want to acknowledge, this is the time for that.
Just kind of piggybacking on the last process though, is our assumption just in the first year or kind of forever that staff, executive director obviously, but other staff sit on subcommittees, like on the advisory board? So I talked to Carrie and doesn't seem like really staff is on any subcommittees. So I'm just wondering if that is the expectation for the first year or moving forward for other cafes as well as us, that staff is sitting on subcommittees.
I think the intention is that we need a staff perspective in some of these spaces, and relying solely on a volunteer committee to move every component of that work forward, I don't think is realistic. I think staff need ownership of some of those pieces, like the farms and garden stuff, right? Like, you need to be in touch with those folks, or volunteers. you know, who are coming in, like, we need to create some leads. So I think that we can talk about that, but I would imagine some presence of staff in any iteration moving forward.
Our original goal is that we would start a committee for each staff position. And then that committee would disband when that staff is hired. So that was our original plan. We would have a food farms and gardens committee, and then it would stop existing and hand over all those relationships to the chef when they came on. That we'd have a volunteer committee that would hand off those to the volunteer manager when they came on. So there was never an intent that we would have an ongoing standing committees that were maintaining those relationships. They would hand them over to staff, and then the people who were on there would help the staff manage those relationships, but not.
Yeah, not to
have a
detract
meeting.
from like the board being very present and continuing to like help outside.
The
of
switch is
normal work
that instead of
hours
having committee meetings, we have staff and then people that are helping the staff versus committee meetings where staff are present.
I like that.
That was always our
Yeah,
intent to
right.
flip it.
The emphasis a lot.
Right.
And then you say, you're like Courtney, you're responsible for food farms and gardens, and now we have all these great people who help build those relationships who will help you maintain them. But it is not you don't have meetings necessarily unless you want help.
Right.
You could call the meeting and say, hey, I need some people to help me out with XYZ.
Mhm.
But the locus of control was always supposed to shift to
Right.
staff upon opening.
Did you?
Go ahead.
It was kind of to piggyback off what you said. I think having basically the back of house manager, the chef, and the front of house manager, cafe manager, or volunteer manager sit in on some of this
Yes.
would be, I don't want to say make it a requirement, but strongly
Yeah,
ask them to do it because we're the ones that's in it
For sure.
5 days a week, 8 hours a
Yeah.
day. So
Wait till you see the back half of these questions.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
more. Maybe you have one more comment.
Yeah, did you say you have 5 questions though, or is it?
Well, I have 5
Oh.
more questions after we take a break.
I'll just say, and I have been saying for a year, and I think it's a serious issue for Toledo. That, we moved in, we had all this disruption, and everybody's trying to stabilize, whatever, but somewhere along the way, the board involvement just dropped off.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's been a good year
Yeah.
since we've had, what are there, 23, 25 names on the list, and we might get 7 people in a meeting. And so the executive team is strong, and there are about 5 others who have contributed majorly. And, and we know who those are,
Right.
and the rest of them, I'm just gonna be blunt, are no-shows.
Yeah.
Absolute no-shows. And it's time to get some people who
Care.
can do this work,
Yeah.
who will show up.
And I think like.
and I love that you said that because that's kind of the idea of doing project based. So that way we could bring people in that are excited about getting it open. And then the expectation is they don't sit on the ongoing committees, or they don't sit on the ongoing advisory board. And so the other thing is I think starting to really enforce, if someone misses 2 meetings, they're not on the board anymore.
Yeah.
If they miss 2 meetings, they have to reapply to get on the board if they want to.
Yeah.
So we can immediately right now remove a bunch of people that have not showed up. Obviously, it's nice if you can reach out to them and say, hey, you're being removed from this, FYI. But like, if you're not involved, you're not a part of it.
But in a way that is inviting.
It's
Of
inviting.
course.
Yes, exactly.
With love,
Our
go
way.
away.
With love.
Just to say this, a good friend of mine does board trainings and he said, this is across nonprofits.
Every.
Of
So, like,
course.
So he would even say like 80% of nonprofits have a hard time engaging, retaining their boards.
Period.
And
Yeah.
so sadly not unique to us, because it does take a concerted effort to provide time and all that stuff. I love the idea of one project based or like, we're not removing PK. He's
No.
remarkable.
Right.
And he's not gonna show up. So
Right.
you do need to take into consideration, there are people who can only contribute in a specific way, but that contribution is valuable.
Absolutely.
And just to be blunt also, you do need high net worth individuals that have unique leverage and significant dollars on your board. And there's some other boards that I've supported in other ways, not directly, indirectly, who they just created roles for them because they're like, he's gonna cut $100,000 check every year. So he is on our board. And so you have to balance like,
Who are those people?
all those pieces of the puzzle effectively, while trying to retain some degree of equity, but we are a young organization that needs doers who can bring that.
For sure.
which is that's kind of, we haven't formalized it entirely yet, but the idea is that we want to have a project-based option for every board that is like, I want to help get it open, and then they can decide to join the ongoing board, but that's what this like grid that we just looked at, this grid, that whole idea is that there's these that are just for opening, and then they stop. So if you want to be a part of the ongoing, then you move into that, but like you get a decision point. The second thing is we have the ongoing boards, obviously, but then the third layer is what Kiyomi just said. We're looking at potentially creating champion roles that are board members, a formal board seat that is a champion role. And their goal is not necessarily to be at all the board meetings, but they're out there championing it. And so that would be someone like if we ever meet the Barefoot Contessa, we would love to have her join our board, but we would not ask her to come and sit at every
You're
board.
like, oh, you missed 2 board meetings, sorry.
We would not want her to be fiduciarily responsible.
Yeah, so she could be a board member, but it'd be an advisory board officially, but as a champion of the organization. We're gonna pause for 5
We're
minutes.
gonna pause for 5 minutes, I'm gonna use the restroom, and then the questions that.
11:30, and we have 30 minutes left. But Abby and I gotta go.
Been on the road for way too long.
2:30. And I can return it.
To go
Return it.
over the river and through the woods.
Yeah, I have to leave it. It's about.
Detroit, yeah, maybe because it's a Saturday, I think.
From here, yeah, I usually.
That's what's new and exciting.
I do too.
And I have to return a car.
I'm gonna retire soon. And finally, what's happening? Yeah, it's 7 months out, but I got it. And I haven't told him at work yet. I've been kind of playing around with when I wanted to do it, so I gotta let him know at work after the first of the year, so we can give him time for the transition, but also not trying to strike where the balance is on there.
Yeah, not too early.
Right. So, yeah, that's the big thing coming up for me. Is, that's gonna be how new. It's actually kind of looking forward to it because like really cuts into my ability to like do some volunteer work for this organization.
Yeah.
Because I'm not available during the day.
Sure.
So it'll provide me more opportunities to do that kind of stuff and other organizations I'm already working with. So. And able to spend more time with my granddaughter. You know, my son's in Kansas City, and it's just really hard to get out there. So sure that it's time, especially after I went through budget prep this year. It's like, yeah, I really rather put myself in the eye of the needles, I think, than do budget sometime.
Yeah.
Especially the way we do it. You know, it just seems like we really don't pay much attention to the budget.
Yeah. That's the theory I'm from. Is your family military?
My dad was.
How about you guys? How's life in Florida? Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the political climate doesn't match that.
Blinders on.
Well, what is he gonna do?
Yeah.
I know I have a friend who's a professor at the University of Florida, and he's telling me they keep those staffing.
So I'm gonna.
Remember, straws, don't eat those. Coffee.
No, you don't want to eat the straws. No, don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it looks like there's a raisin.
Right, thank you.
But we're gonna leave that like there's nothing in there.
So.
I was so sad.
Into the two cakes that I made. I mean, it's something there.
She was gonna reach out and connect me. She had never been like. The my biggest thing is.
Butter?
What's your question? Is that butter?
What's the difference? Yeah,
I think that's butter. I think that's cream cheese.
butter, okay.
I think so.
Thank you.
Yeah, I made a free pumpkin cake specifically for lady yesterday.
Ding, ding, ding. We are back in session, class.
Anyway.
Ding, ding.
Ding, ding. I don't know. Too early for champagne. Okay. Just a personal preface, these questions are the most important questions to me. So thank you so much. Again, super, super valuable. I'm gleaning so much from this, and I just really appreciate the honesty, the openness, the conversation. And I expected nothing less from all of you who I deeply adore. Okay, so we're gonna go through 5 more questions, the back half of the afternoon, morning, whatever time of day it is. So these 5 questions, I think, are some of the most profound for our guidance moving forward. They are personal, but I think there's going to be a lot of synergies across the space. And this is where, just like another check-in, going back to the values of Same Cafe, this is what kind of where we want you to focus your head. So we're going to go through 3 questions. The first 3 are about engagement and our community building pipeline. The last 2 are about advisory board structure. So we're going to do, again, like a quick little head down thought, and then be able to share out. So we're going to start first. This is the stage setting. Knowing we want to create a profound and meaningful role for those involved with Same Cafe in exchange for our community members' contributions and time. The first question, what engagement has felt most meaningful to you in the past year? So, yes, that's the first question. Is it? Sorry. Oh my God, it's so embarrassing. Okay, completely erase your brain.
Same lead in.
Same lead in. Thank you, Judy. When have you felt like we've been living our values in their truest essence? When have you felt like we've been living our values in our truest essence? And I would love for everyone to be able to have the opportunity to share, but we've got a little time limit here. So you can be succinct. If you don't want to share, that's fine. You're also welcome to give feedback, in another fashion moving forward. But when have you felt like we've been living our values in their truest essence? You can do individual example or something that's like a little more global. Would anyone like to be? Go ahead.
No, I mean, there's examples all the time, so in my mind, like, but like yesterday, for example, and I think this happens a lot where we witnessed guests coming in. So we had a group of trans kids that came in yesterday that came, I think it was their first, I hadn't seen them before.
They've been there this week
For the first time. So they kind of, found us. I know at least one of them I saw a Cherry Street lanyard on, but just made note that it was a place that they knew they could come, that they weren't going to be judged, that they feel comfortable, and they volunteered in the back for each one of them for over 30 minutes and seemed to really enjoy themselves. And I mean, for all communities, but specifically like knowing that we're able to create a safe space for folks who in other circumstances and communities might not feel safe, while still like showcasing to them like, hey, we could really use you, and nourishing them. It's just like such a beautiful, to me, example of like living like our highest selves,
Excellent.
both individually and as a community.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
That's wonderful. Go ahead.
Quick one, it was like 2 days before my wedding, there was sadly a break-in, and Carrie called me, and it was like one of these intense moments, and she was like, do I close the cafe because the staff needs support and comfort and connection, or do I keep it open because we need to feed people and they're counting on us? And I left it in her court, but like navigating both of those pieces and trying to find the middle ground was like so beautiful. Of like, how do we make sure people feel safe, but how do we make sure people are fed and community access is available?
Julie said, I always feel that when I'm sitting at the community table having a meal with someone I did not come with.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie.
Anyone else?
I've just had a bunch of meals at lunch with like just so many different, it's always different. That's like such a treasure. Like,
The
when it-
community table.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
It really is, yeah.
I also love that all of our fundraising events are open to everyone. Like, we're not an elitist, like it's a $75 ticket and you can't come.
Yeah.
It is we are all doing this together and you're welcome to be a part of that piece too, which is really, it feels really true to who we are as an organization and just really good. Like it's good to be in that room with all the people. I think we're strongest when we listen to the people that we serve the most. And I think sometimes in board settings and things, we forget that voice doesn't have a seat. Like there's not always a seat for someone who needs the cafe for nourishment every day, to have their voice heard in this sort of like executive kind of functioning of an organization. And I think that just speaks really true to who we are, that our fundraising events are open and there are spots available for people on boards that don't normally have a voice on boards. I love that. Thank you.
I think the fact that 90% of our staff have lived experience of food insecurity is a really beautiful thing. Like almost all of us have had food insecurity in our background, which is really powerful.
So I just, maybe this is opening my camera too much, but so the community table is such a powerful place for me because two things. One, as a personal privilege, I want to make sure that everyone
I have with someone who is in a food crisis or whatever their situation is, that my reaction or my interaction with them is authentic. And sometimes it's hard to find a way to have an authentic interaction, and that community table provides that for me. And believe it or not, as an introvert, I really struggle sometimes just getting outside of my comfort zone to interact with anybody or not. And so again, that community table is just huge for even someone like me who, you know.
Karen being an introvert is the biggest revelation of. Thank you so much for sharing.
I think we came and had a meal in Toledo with my daughter, and I mean, I think this was anyway, she like got to interact with people that she normally wouldn't. And I think similarly, like being from a place of privilege and not having a lot of opportunities for her to like interact with folks who like maybe more unfiltered or don't speak diction that like she's used to hearing, I think was like really great. And also to be able to like be in that space to model for her like what authentic connections look like. And then also have her volunteer. She does some sweeping, you know, like that's really, for me as a parent, it's a really huge gift.
I had the opportunity to meet a young budding assistant professor down at Bowling Green State University a few years ago, and invited him to meet with me at Same Cafe. And what's really interesting about that meeting, it was the genesis of us getting together on a regular basis, talking about building community. All right, so we started at Same Cafe, witnessed it, but now going beyond the food part of it, it's like we talk a lot. Like I met with them a couple of days ago, and basically that's the conversation that we have is building community, and and his family have showed up to other occasions. So it's just an ongoing conversation with them about that. So it's been great. It's been great getting to know him at a deep level. Having deep conversations, which I relish having those deep conversations instead of talking about the weather. And so, and it's, like I said, it's ongoing. He regularly schedules meetings with me to discuss this stuff, so.
Yeah, that extension of community, that's amazing. Wonderful.
Right.
No,
I
go
just have
ahead.
to speak on, I've done like my own kind of like community projects for years, and even just witnessing, sorry, not just with the broadcast, but just witnessing this, like the reflection of and sharing of is essential to just a little bit of like shifting of perspective, seeing a same structure. And so just being able to witness an organization that honors that is, that's like a real time. I'm seeing the essence of the value as being an individual that's working with, all types of things.
Thank you so much. Okay. Question number 2. Similar reflections, but can you provide an example of what engagement from you, from whatever seat you're sitting in, whether it's staff, whether it's advisory board member, volunteer, has felt most meaningful to you? And did I skip a question? What engagement has felt most meaningful to you in the past year, in whatever way you've provided participation or participated in this community?
I would say I had volunteered in Denver, for the years while we were exploring the possibility of creating the same table. And I have been spending most of my time in Florida since the opening. And so I felt like, oh my gosh, we worked so hard and then I don't get to participate, right? Like, and I created that. But I was in Toledo for several weeks recently, and I had a chance to bring lots of different people either to come dine or to volunteer. And that was really fun to be able to, just for me to see what we all have created in different ways, who've contributed. And to get people excited about coming back. Like part of it is, okay, now it's your job to like bring someone else to volunteer or to eat, and but I think probably the thing that I found most meaningful was there's a gentleman who comes, I believe, every day. He's a younger man, and perhaps he may not have housing, or that may be a bit of a challenge. Or and I share that because he comes in and I have not noticed him talking to anyone, and he volunteers. And so over the 3-week period, I just started asking him. I'd say, oh, and oh, your name is, and so I said, and I would say hello to him by name. And then the day before I left town, I went up to him and I said, I am going to be gone for a few weeks. I said, I just want you to know, I've really enjoyed connecting with you over the last few weeks and seeing you every day. Because he's slowly had started opening up. And when I would say hello, he would say again, what's your name? Like it was, and he wouldn't remember my name necessarily, but it was just, I felt like, and maybe I'm projecting, but I felt like he was getting a sense of that there was some connection there. And so I said, I'm going to be gone for a few weeks. And I just want to say, like, I've really enjoyed connecting with you. And I said, so when I'm back in town, I look forward to seeing you. And
You saw him yesterday, right?
I did.
Okay, that's what I thought. I saw that interaction and I was like, oh.
Yeah, he's a neat young man, right? And so when I had said I was going to be gone, I said, so I look forward and I'll make sure I come see you. He said, make sure you do that. I want to see you. It's like, it was just really sweet, right? It was, my impression is that he walks in and is to himself. My guess is because of maybe I'm guessing that there's been some challenges in his life. And so it just feels good that that's a place where he can go there, have a regular interaction with staff that are warm and welcoming and kind, and have a beautiful meal. And it's just really special.
God bless you.
For all of us, right? We're all
Right.
making those connections, right? And I'm richer for knowing, even just having those little interactions, like that feels really good to connect with someone, right? So we're all making that happen.
It's not gonna be as good as Aaron.
We all aspire to be like.
But I guess the one that was most meaningful to me, even though I've only been with Same since August, was the catering that we did for Bittersweet. Bittersweet is an amazing like entity, and just being able to provide the food for their 40, what was it?
40th like donor.
Yeah,
event.
they're 40 and forward.
Yeah.
And being able to see everybody come back for seconds and thirds, and just seeing that whole process was, it hit me in my feels a little bit, especially going to the farm and seeing it and seeing what amazing things that they do for people that normally get cast aside. That really hit me in my feels. So.
You know, for me, it was actually getting together with the national board after the gala. I really just appreciated spending some time with you guys, getting to know you a little bit, because I hadn't done that before, so it was good for me.
I have enjoyed my seat as advisory board chair. I have spent my whole career in the nonprofit sector, and a lot of my work right now is very much behind the scenes. And so like I think that's a skill set that I've really enjoyed lending. I've enjoyed being able to, work with directors and advisory board members who I'm just perpetually inspired by. Like every time I have some type of interaction with Same Cafe folks, it just fills up my cup and reminds me of why I am called to this. And I don't get those reminders as often as I would like, because things become a job. But I think it's the duality of like having that tactile experience. I've just like worked for a couple hours in the cafe, and I had like 6 interactions in 2 hours where I was like saying what's up to the staff and seeing people. I saw Aaron there having lunch with Bryce. And then I had like 3 other interactions with people who were like, this guy came up to me and was like, you're really tall. I was wearing high heel shoes. He was like, you're almost as tall as some of my dudes. It was just so nice. We had like a lovely conversation about music, and I was still, like churning through emails that I was rolling my eyes at. But I just love that, like, Same for me brings all of that unification together, and I just so enjoy every facet of this organization. And I have been very discerning about what boards I sit on because I want to be a good board member and like really show up. And this just always, the community keeps giving and reaffirms that.
Well, we appreciate you in a role.
But my onboarding, or like I try on the Same Cafe, and I have to speak on these 2 over here. I'm gonna tear up. Sorry. Wow. That's all I have to say. It's all that's coming out right now. I look for this type of purity. I look for it, and I've been very picky. Specifically, it might seem like I'm wishy-washy with Chuck, but it's like, if I sniff something that just isn't fixable, doesn't have the ability to actually grow, and then to like work alongside you, like, I'm honored. You are, you have to really look for it to see it, because you're just so humble in what you offer and what you've offered and how you do it. And I'm like, I feel the heart of what you've created, and I like am a part of that. Like, I see it, I see you. I can't even express all that I see. But just like the volunteering aspect, like, ooh, I thought I was a good person, but like being someone who's come from humble beginnings, like and worked my way to a place of like I feel proud of who I am, but I'm like witnessing then how I can grow into a strong community force. And I'm like, okay, I have some examples. You guys are wonderful, and you've created such a, something that I do hold value to. I'm like, okay, I see what you've created, and I want to uphold the mission, I guess, as I walk through that.
You're creating it now.
was gonna say,
You're now
this
part of
is
it. It's
the
not,
most- I think for me, this is the most meaningful moment because all of you have taken something that we just had this tiny little idea and knew that it could have this impact. It could touch people. It could make us better humans. I think that's the thing that I get reminded of every day is that even yesterday when I walked into the space, it was like, it just, you all carry that, you all steward it, and we're just so thankful that it's still happening. It's happening in 2 places now, which just is, overwhelmingly amazing. And I just thank each and every one of you for all of the things that you've given and all the gifts that you bring to it and all the work. I know it's exhausting and tiring and challenging every day, but it's work that makes us amazing communities together, amazing people together. And thank you for that.
I have 3, but I'll be fast. So the first was yesterday, actually, when the media was there. And no one, and I love this because I love media. I love being on camera, no one believes that I'm humble because I'm not. And I love it. But one of the things that I've always been cognizant of is because I love a camera, it's really important that I'm not in front of every camera because this organization is so much bigger than that, right? And so yesterday when the media was there, I loved it because they didn't even ask for me or see me. You were there, Jason was there, the guest Damon was there, and I loved that the whole mission was presented in a way that didn't include one face. And I think that's important because we have the founder sitting over there that were the face of it for a long time. I tend to be the face of it in a lot of settings, and to have the mission be so clearly articulated from people that weren't either of us was incredible. And for me, I was like, this means the mission is the centerpiece, not a person or a personality. So that was like really big. Then I had another moment with the staff level yesterday where I sat down with Sarah and I said, I just want to say, I'm so glad you're still here. And she teared up and said, I feel like a new person. And I look at what's happening with Rory. So I'm bragging on you, Rory, because you have created community with your staff. And I think it's easy for nonprofits to get focused on the end game of our guests and creating community for them. And we forget we have to do that with the staff. We have to do that as a board. We have to do that on every single level, or we are lying to ourselves. And if Rory isn't creating community with the staff, then they can't create community with guests. And so that was another moment. And then my last one was the first one that happened, which was in January. We did our annual survey. And in the annual survey, it was almost identical to the surveys we got in Denver when we did the one in Toledo. And this is when we're in the middle of chaos. We're in the middle, there's a lot going on in January. And we ran the survey and it still said, we had people that said, Same Cafe has saved my life. Like one person said, I haven't had to be back to the emergency room because my inflammation is down because I'm eating healthy food. That's awesome. And I was like, and 86% of the guests in Toledo responded that their life has improved in ways beyond food because of their involvement at Same Cafe. And that's basically what Denver people said. And so I was like, we are already 3 months into this and we're having the same impact on people. I was like, there's something magic here. And so those are all my moments that have been really impactful this year.
Can we put those 3 things on the letter? Those 3 things. In my life.
Yeah, that's what I sent you the quotes.
The quote.
Yeah, just throw those in there because they're profoundly powerful.
Create what the 3 that I just said.
The emergency room, because
Oh yeah.
all these healthcare workers are like, how do we keep people up? Save my life.
She sent me all those 86%.
Yeah.
She sent me all them, and that's what's going to be in the quotes.
Yeah,
Yep.
and they're part of the same ambassador deck and all of
Yep.
that, yeah.
Part of the social media presence is something that I brought to Rory of just like wanting to amplify the voices.
Yes.
Specifically, I think that that's crucial for, you don't even have to do like ask for help. I think if they just see how valuable it is through whom we are creating community with, and that just speaks for itself too. So
Let's talk about social media offline, but one of the things that I have been insistent on since I've been here is that we will never do what I call poverty porn, where we'll trot out a sad homeless person and say, come help this person. We are relentlessly positive in all of our public messaging, like to the point of being annoying. But we say, we are having a party over here and there's really beautiful things happening. Come join and be a part of it. But we never, ever do that. And so we talked briefly and you said you wanted to start to amplify the voices and like put up a picture in people's story of how SAME has helped them and saved their life. And it's beautiful because it's not just people experiencing homelessness, right? Like I am saved every day by SAME Cafe and I'm not homeless anymore. We have 7 minutes. That's all I get out because I will be boxing out.
I think she didn't say there's 30 seconds. So.
Okay, well, we have to do this question, but I feel like we need another positive end note because I think that this gets to the core of something. The advisory board structure, we'll table that for our next.
For the
board meeting.
advisory board.
Yep. But I do think that this question also gets to the root of something that I really want people to reflect on. So in your role, when you have sat around the same table over the course of the past year, when have you felt most disconnected from the values of SAME?
I'll start and say, I wish one of our articulated values was gratitude. Living from a place of gratitude, staff that's working like the why, the what and the how, those are the logistics, those are the everyday, and the people get buried in it. They get worn out, they get, nose to the grindstone. We gotta crank through this stuff, but the why has to be like completely front and center, articulated over and over and over. And with that, like we're exhibiting gratitude for all of it. It's all gifts that we're just channeling. Talk about pay it forward. We are just channeling gift. We are a conduit of all this gift. And if we're not feeling grateful, we're not treating volunteers with gratitude. We're not responding to, food that comes in with gratitude or whatever. And I get that this is all overwhelming, but I feel like if we add that as a core value, and we constantly reminded ourselves to give thanks, to start every day with gratitude, to greet every person with not just hello and how are you, but thank you, thank you, follow up with email or the text that mattered that you came to me, thank you, so obviously when I felt disconnected is when I have seen the opposite, when I have seen things being rejected or metaphorically or literally people being turned away, like just got not walking, like had a group lined up to come and they were told no, like what if, like we can't, we have got to be able to, exhibit the gratitude and then, just, I don't know, to me, that would be a really important adjustment.
Yeah, I think for me, it's probably similar in that I think, the lowest moment for me, or the moment I felt most disconnected was having a conversation with a board member who was like, we were basically saying like, we're not sure what you have to contribute to like the national board at this moment. And losing that person and knowing that they felt not included and felt excluded. And not knowing how to like grow as our organization when we like don't have the capacity to include everyone in the way that they want to be included.
I came here for many reasons, but one of them was because like I think when we were navigating a bit of like, what do we do financially? And the gift of that period was I spent a lot of time with Christina and Erin and a little bit with Carrie and Rory and finance. But when I got into the weeds and I was really in the finances, I was like, how do we make this function? But I got disconnected from these stories and narratives.
you know, and some of it I isolated where I was like, okay, I'll just make the deck, or I'll just do this. I'm very delighted to be to be more of a tag team in all of this, but I think as a, you know, as someone who has a tough job also, sometimes I have to just, instead of going to myself to be like, let me just solve it, my reflex should be, who do I pull in more?
Yeah, I have a similar, like, my brain has been in so much of like process function supporting staff. How do we manage our volunteers? Like, I know that everyone has incredible intentions coming into this space or whatever space they're walking into the same. And it's easy when, you know, also when we're like on a 24/7 news cycle of just the world being the way that it is. You know, I lose sight of that too, right? And then I come back to this, which is so unique, and I feel so connected to something that is like pure and just like this light of I don't know, it's just a very unique experience, and when I'm reminded of that magic, that is what keeps me coming back. And I recognize when I start feeling disconnected, when I get too much in that process piece. I need to rejolt the magic.
I would say something similar, that like when I get wrapped up in the details, important details, but when I do that, apart from the values that we are embodying through these details, I forget, I think I'm doing it alone, right? I think that's something that you felt, that's something all of us have felt in our own ways, that I feel like I'm the only one doing this or the only one caring about it. And when you pull in the rest of the community and create a space of belonging for everyone, you start to realize that like there is support in these places in really beautiful ways.
I think, for me, from behind the front counter, when it's supposed to be, you know, having all these wonderful interactions and conversations with guests, and getting away from that and treating everything as a transaction. Like, what do you want today? Here's a, you know, here's your pizza, here's your food, thanks, bye. And not having the real meaningful interactions that we're supposed to have, and the ones that will keep people coming back, and the ones that will invite guests to participate and want them to be in community with us, instead of just being treated as another person going through the line, another cog in the wheel. That's when things really can go haywire and get lost, and complete disconnection from what it's really about. This is not just another restaurant. This is not just another dollar transaction. Forget the dollars. It's the humans that are.
Christina has her hand up.
It's more a comment than anything else.
Right.
I think it's fascinating to hear all these stories and how quickly everybody finds their way back to connection. And I think it's a really good reminder of everybody sitting in the room and everybody involved in same staff and otherwise, and the people that we serve, how quickly we find connection through each other. Just a quick reminder at how adept everybody is at that. And it's why we're all sitting in this space. And so just kudos to everybody sitting there to recognize how quickly we can connect.
And unfortunately,
That's a
I don't need to
wonderful
hear my
note.
voice. If you all want to stick around, you can, but Abby and I have to run to the airport. Thank you, everybody. This was
Thank you so much.
so valuable. We talked about this at the national board last night, that we might want to start doing this once a year, and it's basically.
What organized religion is supposed to do.
Yeah.
Totally.
Right?
And
Like, that's a once a week thing.
But to doing this retrospective, it's us doing a review on our organization, not a person, but on the whole organization to see. So thank you, Jill. You created magic here. I applaud you. Thank you to every person and all of your contributions. This has been absolutely beautiful.
Deeply appreciated.
Many more years to come. I have to run.
You
guys are awesome.
Happy to go. There's plenty. And I don't really like coffee.
Jill, what media was, what covered it?
Bye-bye.